Alright, yeah, and welcome back to some more Magic Duels. So this week we're going to be taking a look at a Grixis mill deck. So this one was voted on by our patrons by quite the landslide. So hopefully this is something interesting for you guys. So essentially what mill is trying to draw your opponent out of their entire deck so that when they draw a card they lose. So we're using Sphinx's Tutelage, 2 and a blue, enchantment. Whenever you draw a card, target opponent puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his graveyard. If they're both non-land cards that share the same colour, repeat this process. And then you also get to pay 5 and blue to draw and loot. So most of you probably already know Sphinx's Tutelage pretty well. We've also got a little bit of a sub-theme in here as well with Armenket. I thought I might spice it up a little bit. So we're actually kind of implementing a little bit of cycle and discard. So we're using Drakehaven to generate 2/2s, so our alternative win condition in the event of mill not being that great for us is to generate enough Drakes to swing over the top and kill our opponent. So Drakehaven is 2 and a blue, and enchantment. Whenever you cycle or discard a card you may pay 1. If you do, create a 2/2 blue Drake token with flying. So, in the same sense that drawing cards with Sphinx's Tutelage helps us, we've got a lot of cards that actually draw and discard, so that it also helps the Drakehaven. So we've got things like Oath of Jace, that when they enter the battlefield, you draw 3 and discard 2. Discarding 2 will give 2 triggers for the Drakehaven. We can pay 2 and get 4 power on the board. That's the kind of idea. And at the very least, with the Tutelage on board, that's 3 triggers from the draw as well. So that's essentially how this deck is going to run. We go right to the very beginning. We're running Grixis because if we went mono blue, we wouldn't really have enough removal and control on the board. So we've got kind of a heavier creature-based package here as well for those matchups that are just really not helping. Aggro-based stuff we can deal with quite well. So we've got Fatal Push, which is 1 black mana for an instant speed. Destroy target creature. It's got converted mana cost 2 or less. And then Revolt, you get to destroy a creature if it has converted mana cost 4 or less, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn. So we do run Evolving Wilds. We can crack those to trigger Revolt. We also, essentially, if anything on our board disappears, then we'll get rid of it that way as well. Oath of Jace could legend rule the other Oath of Jace. That would trigger Revolt. That kind of thing. So it's not too easy to trigger the Revolt on it, but Fatal Push, even just getting rid of the early game creatures, is just perfectly fine. We then have 2 copies of Magma Spray. These are here for things like Scrapheap Scrounger and Dread Wanderer. It says 1 red mana, instant speed. Magma Spray deals 2 damage to target creature. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. So Scrapheap Scrounger is known for being incredibly annoying and being able to be pulled out of your opponent's graveyard every single turn by exiling a creature. So Magma Spray ensures that it gets exiled instead of going to the graveyard, which is especially good if we are using our mill strategy and we happen to mill his Scrapheap Scroungers. We don't want them to keep coming back and to help our opponent. Same goes with Dread Wanderer for the zombies, and there's even Haunted Dead as well. We can get that killed, so that'll never come back. So Magma Spray does have quite a lot of use and fights a lot of graveyard-based creatures as well. We then have Jace, Vryn's Prodigy, 1 and a blue, 0/2 legendary creature. It says draw a card, then discard a card. So we get a draw for the Tutelage, we get a discard for the Drakehaven. If there are 5 or more cards in your graveyard, then you get to exile Jace and return him to the battlefield as Jace Telepath Unbound. So Jace is 5 loyalty Planeswalker. His +1 ability is not too useful, but it is pretty good to slow down our opponent if we are just trying to buy more time. It says up to 1 target creature gets -2, -0 until the end of the turn. So that could completely knock the power off of a creature perhaps. So that is the way we're going to be ticking up. We can also -3 as well to cast instants and sorceries from our graveyard, essentially giving them flashback. And then if they would be put into our graveyard, they get exiled instead. So you can flashback a pull from tomorrow. So if we went for this X10 or something like that, we could minus on Jace to do it again, recast it for whatever we want, and probably win from there. And then his emblem, his actual ultimate, his emblem, is really useful for this deck as well. It says whenever you cast a spell, target opponent puts the top 5 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So every spell that we cast from that point forward will mill for 5. So we can pull, which will mill for 5, and then all of the draws will mill as well from the Tutelage. So we can do it that way. So, Pull from Tomorrow, really good card, absolute auto-include I would say in mill, because we can draw X cards. So X is how many triggers we want on our tutelage essentially. And then the discard works well with the Drake Haven as well to get us a Drake. We then have 4 copies of Take Inventory. 1 in a blue, sorcery speed, draw a card. Then you get to draw cards equal to the number of cards named Take Inventory in your graveyard. So the first one draws 1 card, effectively replacing itself. The next one gives you 2 cards, the next one gives you 3, the next one gives you 4. So it's really good. The more you've got in your graveyard, the more triggers you get. We can even minus it on the Jace, -3, and we can get another one out of there. It will exile the Take Inventory and it will remove it, so it won't be for the maximum value that Take Inventory could possibly be, but still, being able to flash that back is pretty sweet. We then have Kefnet, the Mindful. So for 2 and a blue, we got a legendary 5/5 creature with flying and indestructible, and it says you can't attack or block unless you've got 7 or more cards in hand. It's pretty possible for us since most of the cards in our deck actually are draw spells, so most of our cards replace themselves, so we'll be pretty much on a high card count most of the time. And if we're not, Kefnet allows us to draw and then bounce lands if we need to. We can use that to maybe pay 3 for this essentially. If we haven't already made our land drop and we don't have a land in hand, we can draw a card which triggers tutelage, bounce the land, make our land drop for the turn, which reduces its cost effectively. And then if we do have 7 cards, we can swing over the top, and that's 4 turns if they don't have a blocker or removal for it, which is very difficult since it is indestructible. We then got Oath of Jace. Oath of Jace is 2 and a blue for a legendary enchantment that says when it ends the battlefield, draw 3 cards and discard 2 cards. So draw 3 for the tutelage, discard 2 for the Drake Haven. The beginning of your upkeep, scry X, where X is the number of planeswalkers you control. The maximum that can be is 2. We've got Jace, and we've got Big Chandra over here as well. We'll get to why Big Chandra is awesome in a moment, but we get to scry 2 if we get our planeswalkers on the board. It's not really used for that most of all, it is just here for the card draw. Then we've got Imprisoned in the Moon, so this is our Planeswalker removal and also deals with a few creatures here and there as well. So for 2 and a blue, Enchantment Aura. Enchant creature, land or Planeswalker, and then that becomes a colourless land with add colourless mana to your mana pool, and absolutely loses everything that it ever was, so there is nothing that it can do once it's been imprisoned in the moon. So we want to attach this to Planeswalkers because it is a little bit annoying to deal with them, so we've got lots of answers for them. So we then got Drake Haven. We have touched upon this. 3 mana enchantment, pay 1 to make 2/2s whenever you cycle or discard a card. Should mention as well, we do have a few cyclers in here as well, so we can cycle to get some value. If it turns out that tutelage is not the way that we're going to win, then Drake Haven is the alternative. We then got Fevered Visions, so this is an auto-include in any mill deck most of all. So for 1, a blue and a red, we've got an enchantment that says at the beginning of each player's end step, that player draws a card. If that player has more than 4 cards in their hand, then it deals 2 damage to him or her. So we get to draw an extra card every turn, which is an extra trigger on the tutelage. It's also just going to keep filling up our hand, making sure that we've got answers and things to do at all times. What it also does is burn our opponent as well. If they are playing a slow deck, we can punish them. If they are playing control, then Fevered Visions can win you the game on the spot as well if they can't deal with it. Because a control deck wants to have many cards in hand to deal with our threats. So if we land a Fevered Visions, then they're getting punished for having a larger hand. And also it's drawing them extra cards as well, which doesn't trigger the tutelage on their turn. But still, it's an extra card, so it's nothing to be upset about as far as we're concerned. We've got then Collective Defiance, so for 1 and 2 red, sorcery speed. We get to escalate this for 1 mana extra, so we can pay 1 mana extra for each mode that we choose beyond the first. So for 3 mana, we can maybe do one of these 3 things. For 4 mana, we can do 2. For 5 mana, we can do all 3. So the modes are as so. Target player discards all the cards in his or her hand and draws that many cards. We want to point this at ourselves when we've got a tutelage on the board. So if you imagine we've got 7 cards in hand, we Collective Defiance with this first mode activated, and we've got 6 cards in hand. It redraws 6. That's 6 triggers on the tutelage, 12 cards minimum. So there is a lot of power in Collective Defiance. You can also use it as a bit of creature removal as well, because it deals 4 damage to a creature. And maybe a bit of burn or planeswalker removal as well. by dealing 3 damage to target opponent. So there's a lot of uses for this card. It's never really a dead card, as long as you can cast it, of course. But we do have ways of casting it without even the double red in things like Yahenni's Expertise. We then got Trial of Knowledge. So for 3 and a blue, enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, draw 3 and discard a card. So it's just a single copy. It's essentially just the Oath of Jace. I just wanted to make sure that we had more of these draw and discard effects. So 1 copy of Trial of Knowledge essentially means we've got a few more of those to go around. So I do enjoy that. Might cut it, might not. We'll see. Then we've got Hieroglyphic Illumination. So for 3 and a blue, instant speed, you get to draw 2 cards. Pretty simple. But it does also have cycling for 1 blue mana, and it means that we discard this card and we get to draw a card. So we can use this in the early game if we don't have our 4 mana, just to get a redraw. We can cycle to get the Drakehaven trigger. So maybe if we want a Drake pretty soon, then we can actually cycle this away, get a redraw. But, you know, most of all, the draw is for the triggers on the tutelage. We then have Yahenni's Expertise, so this is why we're running black most of all, for the board wipes. So for 2 and 2 black, sorcery speed, all creatures get -3/-3 until the end of the turn. Then you may cast a card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. So anything 3 or less does include Collective Defiance to help deal with that double red if that's a problem. We can slam a Fevered Visions down as well. We can get our tutelage down, more importantly, off of a board wipe, as well as Drakehaven. And if we need to get a little bit of extra damage from the board wipe as well, we could even Magma Spray and ensure that something gets exiled from that. So we can maybe do 3 to everything and 5 to something else in the right hand with Yahenni's Expertise. We then have 1 copy of Diabolic Tutor. So for 2 and 2 black, sorcery speed, search your library for a card, put that card into your hand and shuffle your library. So one of the downsides of tutelage decks is that you can only run 3 copies of Sphinx's tutelage due to its rarity restriction right there. So I'm running an extra copy of Diabolic Tutor just so that we effectively have 4 tutelages available, because there's nothing worse than playing a tutelage deck and never finding your tutelage. So 4 copies effectively means that we're going to see the tutelage at some point during the game, more likely. We then got Chandra Flamecaller, so for 4 and 2 red, 4 loyalty Planeswalker. We can use this as a little bit of a damage dealer if the mill's not going to work. So for +1, make 2 3/1 red elemental creatures, effectively hitting for 6 with haste, and then they get exiled on the end step. The 0 cost, though, is what we really want this card for. If we've got a tutelage on the board, then we want to use the 0 ability, because we get to discard all the cards in our hand, draw that many cards, +1. So this is kind of a free way of discarding and drawing, which is free tutelage triggers, but also it allows us to keep our mana open as well for Drakehaven. So we can spend all of our mana to make 2/2s and swing in that way. So even this 0 cost can put damage on the board for us. And then we also need it for its minus ability as well. She is 4 loyalty, so she can actually minus X, or 4 in this case, straight off the bat to deal 4 damage to each creature. 3 if it works fine and we can keep Chandra around. Depending on the situation, of course. Depends on how much you want to minus that for. And if we have been plussing all of this time as well, then maybe we can actually wipe the board for even more than that. Finally, we've got Never to Return. So Never is 1 and 2 black. Sorcery speed, destroy target creature or planeswalker. Yet again, dealing with planeswalkers. Super Friends is my most hated deck to play against, so I am going all out on the aggro against those guys. I'm going to be able to kill those with just a 3 mana spell, so it's going to be really good value for us. But also, the return in the graveyard is very important as well. So return is 3 and a black with Aftermath, which means we cast it from our graveyard, and once we do, we exile it. It says exile target card from a graveyard and then create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So this is here for Commit to Memory, essentially. Commit to Memory is the bane of Mill. So if we go and have a look at Commit to Memory, wherever it's gone, it's actually probably not there. I guess I don't want to put instant speed or something like that. Let's go right there and then go find it. I think it's probably all the way at the end somewhere. I have no idea. Commit to Memory essentially is a 4 mana spell that says return target permanent, bounce the permanent second from the top or something like that, but the memory on the back allows you to shuffle your entire graveyard back into your deck. So you can imagine how that really works well against tutelage decks. So if we use Never to Return, then we can exile that from our graveyard, from their graveyard, before they get a chance to use it, because it is sorcery speed. So we can deal with that immediately. So that's essentially the deck. Let's go on to the mana, shall we? We've got 11 islands, because this is mostly a mono blue deck. And then we've got 2 swamps for all of our double black stuff, and 1 mountain as well for some of our double red. We've got Evolving Wilds, which allow us to go and grab whatever colours we need. 3 of those. As we mentioned, these get to trigger Revolt on the Fatal Pushes as well, so they go really well with those cards as well. Thinning our deck as well means that we're not actually going to hit as many lands as well. We don't want to be doing that. We want to be drawing into more draw spells, essentially, when we finally get the train going. We then got Wandering Fumarole as a blue and a red land. It comes into play tapped, which is a downside, but the upside is it can actually be a 1/4 creature that we can pay 0 and switch its power and toughness until the end of the turn. So we can swing for 4 every turn for 4 if we want, if the board is open, ready for us to go. We then got Drowned Catacombs that enter the battlefield tapped unless you control an island or a swamp, so a blue-black land that benefits from us having a basic in play. And the same goes for Dragonskull Summit, except for it is in black and red. We then got 1 copy of Gyreach Sanitarium, adds 1 colours to our mana pool, and then we can pay 2 to make each player draw a card, then discard a card. So we get to go find out what is on top of our deck, maybe trigger tutelage, discard to maybe even trigger the Drake Haven, but it's also making our opponent loot as well, so you've got to be careful with this. It's a little bit better when our opponent's empty-handed, or if they're tapped out so that they cannot make much use of the cards that you're drawing them into. So you've got to keep that in mind. We're only running 1 copy of that, because it's not overly useful, but it is nice nonetheless. Alright guys, that's going to do it for the deck. So if you did enjoy the look of the deck, then be sure to check out the matches that should be following very shortly. And also like and subscribe, it helps me out a great deal, and it's a perfect way to support the channel. I appreciate it a lot. If you hit that little bell icon as well, right next to the subscription button, you'll get notifications when future videos go live. I do hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.